Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today to speak to your conference. It's an absolute pleasure and delight to be with you today. I'm so sorry I missed the mindfulness, because that sounds just like something parliamentarians need just now, um, particularly after the year that we've all had. So I hope that you enjoyed your mindfulness this afternoon, and it's teed you up ready for this introduction. This is important to me to be here today for a number of reasons to speak with you. I chair the Disability All Party Group in Parliament, and so I do a lot of work in relation to health, disability, welfare, criminal justice, and many elements of legislation that come through Parliament. And it's very much a cross-party group, and we get great support from members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords across all parties, who have a real keen interest in supporting people with disabilities across the lifespan. I'm also Vice Chair of the All Party Group for Brain Injury, and that's chaired so very ably and notably by Chris Bryant MP, who I believe spoke with this group and at your conference last year about his work in Parliament, which is so very important in relation to increasing awareness of brain injury and the impact on people and their families, and indeed their opportunities in life, and what Parliament in so many different aspects of government needs to do to address the very real needs and aspirations of those who've suffered a brain injury across the lifespan, and to make sure that their health needs, but also their occupational needs and societal needs in general, and fulfilling quality of life needs are all addressed. That's particularly personal to me as well, because my husband served in the armed forces over a period of 4 years, and during that time he himself suffered a brain injury. So I'm very much aware, not just as a member of Parliament and working on the All Party Group with Chris, but also from personal experience as to the impact of brain injury, the struggle that many people can have to access rehabilitation, and not just in hospital but also in the community, and over the longer term when perhaps some of the functions have restored and people feel they're getting back into the lifestyle that they once perhaps had, but still have residual ongoing issues over the long term. And I'm very much committed to trying to make sure in Parliament that we improve services and supports for people who have suffered brain injury. In relation to the All Party Group, we've been working really hard over the past year, and commissioned a report over the past year, looking at a number of aspects of services as they currently stand. So we have addressed issues in relation to education, and that many children and young people who have suffered trauma to the brain returning to mainstream education and schooling. I mean, particularly if we then add in the additional complication of COVID over the past year, that can be a daunting experience, but also in terms of having that additional support in the situation that we've been experiencing over the past year has added and exacerbated those issues. Many young people, as you know, following from brain trauma may have to relearn speech or writing skills, may suffer ongoing problems in relation to impulsivity or executive functioning, depending upon where the brain injury has situated, and may experience some developmental delays. So we've been looking at some of these issues and thinking that it's really important to learn from best practice, and that teachers have some training on helping and supporting young people with brain injuries, and also that there's access to neuropsychological supports in terms of assessments and advice and rehabilitation support when back in school. Structured pathway system for families also who can sometimes feel very much on their own at times, struggling with an issue that they perhaps has come as a shock and sudden, and that they feel that they need a bit of well-being support in order to cope with their emotions too. Mental health's actually become one of the issues that we are speaking about much more frequently in Parliament in terms of well-being and a well-being agenda. And recognising that it's not just about addressing physical health needs, but also about a holistic approach to people's needs, including mental well-being and mental health. And I think that's very much the case in relation to neuro rehabilitation, but it's also come much more to the fore in the past year as we've seen how we're coping in a much better scale now with the vaccinations with COVID, but over the longer term there will be those mental health and well-being ramifications, adjustment, anxieties that people will have to very naturally deal with in order to improve their qualities of life again and get back to day-to-day living as they would like to see it. So we're trying, and I think I don't know if people are aware, but prior to coming into Parliament, I myself worked for over 20 years, and very much giving away my age now, and in the area as a psychologist. So I spent a lot of time helping people with rehabilitation issues, and particularly with cognitive rehabilitation. And I used to run a memory clinic actually for people who had suffered stroke and dementia. That was one of my first jobs. So I'm aware that we need to do so much more across the lifespan, and in making those psychological assessments available to people at the time that they need them, and also having the reviews that are needed in order to assess how people's functioning might be restoring or adapting, and also as to any particular types of memory aids or other types of aids that might be helpful in terms of rehabilitation pathways. So it's really important that young people in schools, when this happens to them and their families, they have that adequate support, both for physical health in terms of assessment and also in terms of social and mental well-being supports moving forward. One of the other issues we've been really looking at in depth in Parliament through Chris's group is the criminal justice system. And I know myself actually from having worked for many, many years in and out of the prison system as to how frequent it is that people may have an undetected brain injury or head trauma, or even a number of head traumas throughout their lives prior to sentencing, or even some additional ones whilst incarcerated, and that this has often not been recognised, and certainly the impact upon perhaps their ability to regulate emotion, regulate behaviour and levels of impulsivity, and also individuals' ability to undertake programmes of treatment in prison. In order to put all of that into place, we really need to have a good assessment of functioning and know whether someone has had any brain trauma, and whether that is impacting upon their ability to participate in treatment programmes, also whether it may have impacted upon their response in the incident that brought them to the notice the system in the first place. So one of the studies that was conducted by Majesty's Prison in showed that almost half, 47% of adult male prisoners had a history of traumatic brain injury, and that 70% reported their first brain injury as having happened before their first offence. So I think with those statistics in mind, it's obvious that we do need a greater understanding of the scale of brain injury within the population in prisons, but also of the potential impact upon sentencing, appropriate sentencing, any diversion from a custodial disposal that can be achieved through rehabilitation and meeting someone's needs if they do have a significant brain injury that's had an impact upon offending behaviour. I know from working in that system myself that very often the first time that any cognitive impairment, either brain trauma or any kind of learning disability, is noted often is when someone has come to the attention of the system, and perhaps their solicitor thinks it would have been useful to have a report into those matters, and often you're speaking to people at that stage who have gone through a whole part of their lives, including their education and perhaps their early work history, struggling and being told that their difficulties are down to behaviour and their attitudes and their inability to want to cooperate, when actually there can be an underlying neurological issue at play there that really needs to be identified. And often I was asked to do assessments looking at intellectual functioning, executive functioning in terms of impulsivity, memory ability, understanding of the criminal justice system itself, and ability to participate in what tends to be the treatments that are offered in prison for populations at the present time, which involve cognitive behaviour therapy, and as to why someone might not be able to engage and to learn from the programme being offered because they may have an actual injury to their brain that means that they find it very difficult to either retain that information or to apply it in situations, and also that they really are needing a more specialist adapted programme of treatment to give them the opportunity to succeed and to move on and reintegrate into society in a much more positive way. So we were looking at issues in the All Party Group about having brain injury link worker services in prisons, which I think would be an excellent step forward, and it's certainly something that we hope to be able to encourage the rollout of right across the criminal justice system. I'm going to speak for about another 5 minutes and then take some questions, because I want to have a bit of participation from yourselves as well, and I think that would be really helpful for me, because part of this is about learning from people's experience and knowing what's happening on the front line, so we can take that learning back to Parliament and try to improve services and legislation and supports for people. And so it's a great opportunity for me not just to speak today, but to hear from those who are participating in the field. A few of the other things that I'm doing in Parliament that might be relevant to those who are taking part in the conference today are linked with the Disability All Party Parliamentary Group. So we are now in an inquiry into access to elected office, which is about people with disabilities being able to engage in politics, no matter the party, right across parties, and being able to stand for Parliament themselves to represent their needs and to develop the policies that really they feel should be in place, because Parliament and should in future days be much more reflective of the society that we are, and make sure that it's accessible for everybody to become a parliamentarian. Certainly I have my husband, who I spoke about at the start of our today's conference and my speech, who started out life in the armed forces, is now a local councillor. And actually, we're very proud of him because he did receive a Councillor of the Year, New Councillor of the Year award in the Scottish Awards this year, but very much linked with his work that he's been doing for veterans since taking up that council role. So no matter your background, you can come and relate and use those experiences in representing those who have similar experiences. And part of the difficulty, though, I suppose, in his journey into being elected into the local authority as a councillor was the lack of support to stand and the lack of understanding of the difficulties in relation to standing as someone who had a background where they had some ongoing difficulties in perhaps presenting complex information, understanding complex information, and communicating and in the way that they wished. Certainly, that's something that he's grown greatly and has been doing a marvellous job. But I suppose my perspective of it was that it was the opportunity to start with, and it was the lack of support that was concerning. And I think so many people with all different types of disabilities can contribute greatly to elected office. And so we're undertaking this inquiry and hoping to receive either written submissions from people who have had experiences, good and bad, in relation to opportunity to stand and also to learn from their experience, but also for them to be giving very much recommendations for the report, to be thinking about how can we improve this system so that there's opportunity for all, and so that we can ensure that Parliament is accessible to people from all walks of life, and that you can stand and that we stand with you and support you to do that. As I said, it's really vital, and I think it is crucial moving forward that people can relate to those who we have in our parliaments at local authority and at Westminster levels. And there still exist too many barriers, unfortunately, to being able to take up those roles. The other thing that I'm working on is with members of Parliament. So as chair of the disability group, I am undertaking some training with the Department for Work and Pensions, with MPs and their office staff, so that they themselves can become disability confident employers, because not everybody wants to become a parliamentarian themselves. Some people might want to work in politics, and we want to make sure that if someone has any kind of disability, that we are good employers as members of Parliament. We understand the legislation, we're able to access the adequate supports, and we're able to make Parliament itself, right across all of the constituencies of the United Kingdom, an engaging and inclusive environment for everybody. So this year we're hoping to engage up to 100 MPs from different parties and to have them accredited and trained as disability confident employers. And finally, just in the last minute or so before we take some questions, I just wanted to also mention a new group that's ongoing in Parliament on inclusive entrepreneurship, because often I find when I enter Parliament that when we were speaking about disability, it was often in the context of benefits or the Department for Work and Pensions solely. And what I want to do is change the narrative. So this new group is looking at how to ensure that people who have disabilities, a whole range of different types of disabilities, also have adequate access to support from government to become entrepreneurs and to start their own business. Often when I was speaking to people in the disability group, in the sessions we've held in Parliament, they would say to me, there were never any role models for me to go into business. There was no one like me who was doing that. And what we want to do is to really harness and champion those who are already in the field, and learn from their experience and make the path easier and much more accessible and equal for those coming behind, to make sure that no matter who you are, no matter the challenges you've had to overcome, that you are able to start your own business and have adequate access to finance and supports, and that it's based upon your idea and not your background that precludes you becoming a business person yourself. So there's a number of issues we're working on. I hope that's been of interest to the delegates that you have today at your conference. I'm very keen to take some questions in the 10 minutes that's remaining, and also to take back insights and best practice and understanding from the work that you've been doing yourselves in relation to these important matters back to Parliament, so that we can improve practice and legislation and support moving forward. So thank you so much for having me, and over to yourselves for questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Lisa. Our first question from Jacqueline is your group looking at the assessments that the Department of Work and Pensions use in relation to those with a brain injury?
Yes, well, we've been looking at PIP assessments in particular in relation to both mental health and brain injury, and how it is that, I suppose, the assessments that DWP have been undertaking, whilst quite comprehensive in some ways, seem to fit more to physical injuries. If someone is perhaps in a wheelchair or can't walk, they're asked if they can raise their arm or walk a certain distance, but doesn't quite reflect the difficulties that someone who's had a traumatic brain injury can experience in relation to their functioning, and that's similar to the difficulties that we've been alerted to in relation to mental health. Doesn't seem to be particularly well reflected. And as I said, we've been trying to encourage that holistic approach, whereby government assesses the whole person and understands that if you can have a mental health difficulty without having a disability, you can have a disability and you can experience mental health issues. So we need to be assessing the whole person, and that the assessment should reflect the level of their difficulties in all realms, not just in a sort of physical health aspect, which I think is, they cover that quite comprehensively, but not so much in relation to memory, in relation to speech, cognition, executive functioning, some of the issues that can really impact people who suffer brain injuries throughout their lives.
That's great, thank you. The next one is from some of the charities. Actually, it's a question that I've had from about 3 of them, and it's around the recovery process and support financially for some of the charities, because they've been unable to fundraise, they've been unable to get access to people to donate. So is there going to be a pot of money that can be accessed to allow these charities to continue the work that they do?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's above my pay grade at the Chancellor's pay grade, but I do know that there has been a charities fund, because I alerted some charities to that fund in my own constituency. Whether or not that's now closed and there's to be another round of that is certainly something that I can take back to Parliament and get information on for yourselves, and I'll raise some questions on that matter to take that one forward. I do understand that that's been a massive issue, because so many charities rely on that contact, out and about with people to raise their funds, or perhaps events that they host each year, where people come along and donate money at those events, or donate their time or other aspects. So I think charities have been really badly hit by COVID regulations and restrictions in relation to their fundraising, and it's something that has been acknowledged already. But as your delegates had informed, it's not been sufficient, and it is something that cross-party, I think, MPs will continue to certainly champion. I would suggest also contacting your own MP and highlighting if there's a specific charity in your locality, and they can write to government as well. But yes, additional funding for charities is something that I expect will get a lot of support across party from MPs, and we'll continue to raise that.
One was Anne Patton has said that her colleagues had trained prison staff on brain injury awareness in Greenock Prison to help them dealing with prisoners with injuries. So do you think this is something that could be taken further afield in Scotland?
Absolutely. I think it would be fantastic if Anne could get in touch with myself. In fact, I used to go in and out of HMP Prison Greenock. It's very difficult to find for people who don't know where it is. It's in the middle of a housing estate in Greenock. I know exactly where it is because I've been in and out quite a few times when I was working as a psychologist. But having that training for prison staff who are actually dealing with such a myriad of people's difficulties, you know, from autism to ADHD to brain injury to mental health issues, all in a prison setting. And I think training for those prison officers is really crucial so that they feel supported in their role as well, and they know, you know, how to signpost people and also how to get them the support that they need. So could you please contact me, Anne? I'll pop my email here into the main box, and if anybody needs to contact me about any of the questions or work that I've mentioned, then please don't hesitate to do so, and we can take these issues forward. Here we are.
No, and I think everybody's just waking up after lunchtime because normally they're full of questions. So I think that's the questions for us. The speaker that's coming on after you, Lisa, actually, she's in your constituency, so she was so delighted that that you were coming on to speak. Jacqueline, who works for Digby Brown and does the welfare support for the charities and things. So she's coming on now to speak about those type of things.
Too, it's a fantastic constituency. It's the constituency where I grew up as well, so that's always a real privilege to represent people where you grew up. And thank you to Digby Brown as well for all of that work that they're doing in this field, because I think it's just so crucial that it's undertaken. And it was really highlighted to me specifically through my work in prisons as a psychologist that many people had been struggling for many, many years in their lives, and they hadn't been properly assessed and diagnosed and been given the appropriate supports. And I think that those are the key crucial issues that we need to try to take forward. So that's definitely a priority of the All Party Group for Brain Injury that Chris Bryant chairs. You know, he is very, very dedicated to making sure that services improve, and we all work together cross-party. So please get in touch with me, and if you want me to pass any information to Chris as well or to the All Party Group, I can certainly do that. So thank you.
No, and we're delighted as well, Lisa, that we have somebody on the committee that has got personal experience as well of brain injury. It can only further help push things to give extra support. So thank you so much for giving up your time today. It was really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody.